Welcome everyone to our afternoon panel discussion. This discussion is going to be about process and barriers. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Carlos O'Donnell. I am a Red Hat Enterprise Linux developer. I work for Red Hat. My co-host is Maxim Kuvyrkov. And we have a wonderful panel arrayed out in front of you today. The panel is here to talk about people, not projects. And in focusing on people, we're going to focus on 4 specific areas. And in those 4 areas, we want to get audience questions. We want to understand places where you have had friction, or places, even if you want to say where you've had successes. And we want you to ask the panel questions. And they're going to be thinking about it from a people, not project perspective. We're going to be looking at onboarding. We're going to be looking at growth. We're going to be looking at roles, how decisions are made, and what tools an individual person needs to succeed in the projects. We want you to look at these topics from that perspective of, again, a person, not a project, and we want you to think of questions. So I'm going to walk around and I'm going to pick questions, but we want you to stay within the topic areas. We're not going to roam far and wide. Any questions that we can't answer, you can thankfully ask tomorrow morning at the steering committee Q&A, in which GNU project members and maintainers will be present for all the projects. But these people here cover a broad array of projects, but today they're just developers. They've taken those other hats off, right? But they have their own perspectives about how they grew and became developers. I was just asking Nick Clifton, how long ago was it you started contributing to Binutils? And
how old is the Binutils now?
Yeah. So again, we'll take questions. So I'm going to hand over to Maxim right now, and I'm going to go up to the audience. If you have a question that you want to ask, raise your hand and I can come around and talk to you. Okay? Maxim, do you want to show our areas? Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with panelists, and we'll let them introduce themselves. Starting with Jan.
Okay, hello. So I'm Honza Hubička. I'm working on GCC since also quite a long time. I think I started in 1999. And yeah, and I'm maintaining some parts of GCC like profile feedback, LTO.
So I'm Jeremy Bennett. I run Embercosm, and I've been working on GCC and LLVM and all sorts of software forever.
I'm Florian Weimer. I'm the Glibc tech lead on the Red Hat Platform Tools team and a frequent Glibc upstream contributor and a much less frequent GCC contributor.
I'm Richard Biener, working for SUSE and working on GCC like for 25 years or so. And I'm one of the release managers and middle-end maintainer, doing everything and nothing as the day comes.
Right. Hi, I'm Nick Clifton. I'm Binutils. So I actually started with GCC, and then I kept on finding bugs that weren't GCC caused by GCC, but caused by the Binutils. So I started fixing them, and then somebody decided, hey, you can look after it. And, well, okay, fine. So yeah, that's me.
I'm Adhemerval Zanella. I've been working with Glibc for 15 years, I think. And I think that's it. I don't have much to add now.
Hi, I'm Pedro Alves. I started working on the toolchain 2006, I think. Started actually playing with GCC and Binutils and the linker as a kind of a hobby thing. It's never going to take me anywhere. And then the last piece I wanted to work on the toolchain was a debugger, and then I ended up staying, working on the debugger since. Yeah.
Awesome. So these are the areas. We are going to spend about 10 minutes for each. And we are going to start with our first area.
And our job is to guess the area. Yeah.
Our areas.
Depending on the questions that get asked, you have to guess the area that you can't see above you.
So, yeah. The first area is onboarding new developers. So, while the audience takes a moment to think about the first questions, let me start up with some preceded questions. What are acceptable ways to interoperate with GitHub? And try not to say no immediately.
No. I will say it outside of the... You failed, Andrew, sorry. Yeah.
Let's start with Richie.
Can you explain what is GitHub? I'm not sure. So I'm developing GCC and there is no GitHub for GCC. So why should I start interacting with GitHub? So I probably didn't understand the question.
Let's imagine I'm a new developer and I played with open source and I made a couple of PR requests in GitHub. I watched a couple of YouTube videos and now I want to implement a new optimization in GCC. Why GitHub is not supported? Why am I having this barrier?
Hang on.
It's okay. So my view on that is it has always been the way it is now, right? You are supposed to write patches and send them as email and do regression test them before on your local machine. And it has been that way and people coped with that.
There is no... It may not be supported at the moment. That doesn't mean it can't be supported in the future. And I mean, you wanted us to ask as individuals, not as maintainers, you see. So
I want the focus to be people.
Right.
There are people here and they have friction with process.
Right.
And I want you to answer as a person.
So as a person, I haven't used GitHub extensively, at least not for GCC, obviously, or Binutils, but I have used it for other projects. So I am starting to get familiar with it. I'm by no means an expert. And it's another way of solving the problem of source code control and how to manage big projects. So yeah, sure, let's have it. But I can't tell you the reason why it's not being done today is X. That's not, I don't have that answer.
So I think the question is more like why a new developer needs to use old tools that we are used to do. And it's a fair question because new developers are not familiar with email-based development. And I think it's a fair assumption that we should adopt new ways, or at least some different ways, so we can check how new developers are doing new stuff, and at least to improve communication.
Sorry, just quickly putting my maintainer hat back on for a second is, my wonder is, what do I have to do as a maintainer to enable it for people to use GitHub for contributions?
We have a question from Arjun, maybe related to the topic. Arjun, is it tied to this topic?
So I'm not volunteering to do this, but I still want to ask about it. Maybe somebody will do it. I don't know. I've run a couple of workshops on trying to contribute to Glibc. I did a talk about it just recently. Some of you were there. And people did ask about, like, do you have a GitHub? Should I create a new branch to write this fix and so on, which is not something we care about too much in the sending patch by email world. So maybe the reason it's not being done is because nobody has done it. And maybe if somebody on their own, potentially, it's a distributed community after all, on their own runs a mirror on GitHub or GitLab or whatever cool, like, new social coding site, and forms a bridge, manual or through, I don't know, a bot that sends out emails, that's kind of going to be okay, right? It's going to be, maybe it's a solution and maybe you're okay with that. Like, there are PRs filed in GitHub and then something or someone converts it to an email. and then it goes back, or like, is that a solution? And is it just that somebody needs to implement it and it will be okay?
Can I just, so perhaps, I rely on meeting my customers where they are. And if I don't, they won't pay me, and then my staff don't get paid, and then we haven't got GCC community members. We work on GitHub, GitLab the whole time. Don't get hung up on GitHub. It's the mechanism of Git. And actually almost all our stuff is done on our personal GitLab implementations. But its reality is it's where our customers are, it's where our young engineers are, and we just mirror what's going on GCC. And when we've got something we want to contribute upstream, we've done all the work, we take it out of GitHub and grind it through the process. And, you know, that was what was happening in LLVM, and LLVM gave up 18 months ago and just moved over to GitHub. I'm not saying we need to do that, but it's where the real world is.
I have a question over here from David.
I wanted to follow up on the comment and relate to what Arjun said, is that that's exactly the issue, and actually already is being deployed, that there are various areas within GCC, such as Rust, which is performing most of their development in GitHub and mirroring that and contributing upstream and utilizing. And so it basically is the maintainer that the project itself is not, as in GCC or glibc, is not hosted in GitHub, but there is nothing preventing individual groups, people working on projects, to utilize GitHub for that development. And as people are saying, I think that as, you know, exactly as Jeremy expertly said, I mean, we meet the developers, we meet the customers where they are, and if that's where new communities want to do their development, that's perfectly okay as we, you know, merge these different development processes together.
All right. So this is about personal experiences, and recently-ish, at where I have been doing work, development has switched completely to using GitHub, the enterprise version of that. And well, we had no choice. We are learning to get used to using GitHub, which has been a learning experience, and I have to say frustrating, because there's a lot of friction compared to how we are used to doing development, on the way you interact with the tooling, how reviews are done. To give you some examples, I've discovered very recently, because I've been forced to, that it's not just, you don't just say use GitHub. There are different ways of using GitHub. There are some projects that allow merge commits and do review, and then people push fix-ups to the branch, and then that's reviewed as a unit. The review unit is the branch, not the patches themselves, and then that's merged as a merge commit. Some other projects, you do that, and they go like, no, we don't do that here. And it's the same company. We instead squash and push. So all the history of the fix-ups, they don't matter. Don't waste time writing commit logs, because they're going to be discarded completely. And others, like the GDB project, my team, we try to follow a model closer to what we used to, where we do a patch series, and when the patches are related, we build a branch with that and submit that as a single PR. And then we review that, and we are all, I think I can say all, in the team, and there, Lancelot is shaking his head, frustrated, because the review interface for that model is very frustrating. You cannot review the commit subject, commit log itself. You cannot approve one of the patches in the series, because, again, the review unit in the GitHub methodology is the branch, not the commit. So you have a patch series as a branch. You cannot say, I agree with the patch in the middle. You have to approve either the whole thing or not all of it. So there are ways around this, and then we are frustrated with these things when we try to figure out what tooling is there out there that lets us.
Can you imagine, though, that you are a brand new developer and you have never seen anything except that?
Exactly.
Right.
And
so what I want to challenge everybody here, and make sure that maybe Hansa gets an opportunity to answer this question too, is I have talked to people and they're like, what's a patch? And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know what a patch is? And they're like, I just have an MR or a PR. I don't make patches. I don't email patches. I don't send anyone patches. I just change code, tell someone else that that code needs to be changed, and then change it.
Right. Let me just finish
Yeah.
by saying exactly that. It's that when I express my frustration to my colleagues, they will completely understand what I'm saying because they are used to the way of GDB working, GNU Toolchain, mailing lists, and all of that. When I express that frustration to someone who's not familiar with that, they will go like, "What are you talking about? Are you crazy? This is how it works." Of course, it's how it works.
So we are.
We need to learn how to bridge this gap.
Yeah, Hansa. We are going to take comment from Hansa and one more question
One
in
more
this area,
question,
and
we'll
then we
be
switch
waiting right
to the
here.
next area.
Yes.
So start thinking about your questions for the next area.
I'm sorry, Lancelot, but there's dinner tonight and we can both cry together, so.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'm not sure what actually is the question, but I should answer it. But so I think, in GCC, when I started to do GCC patches in mid-90s, it took me 2 years to get a signature from Stallman and access to the current source code so I can make the patch. We made a kind of big change since then. Like we have public repository and we have patch emailing list. So that has improved. I'm also having this kind of course of compilers to the students, and I guess the GitHub is kind of the default. Or Git is the default method of the I used to. But I think getting used to the patch, sending patches is not that hard. So it's just one of the improvements we can do.
We can also enforce. Yeah.
Yeah, ask your question, yes.
So new developers typically tend to be seen as challengers, as contrasting the status quo, existing tooling, things that already work quite well, one would say. How can this contrast be amended?
And let's take Adhemerval.
Could you repeat the question, please? Yeah.
So the point is onboarding new developers. New developers bring in new ideas, different ways of thinking. And it seems to me that there's an example here of a contrast, right? A fight between old and new. How can we remove this contrast? How can we turn this fight?
How do you build a bridge?
How do we build a bridge? How do we bring in imagination into this so that it is no longer a fight?
But do you mean by new process for managing
the question's for you to answer it,
It's a question, not an answer.
Because I think that I see a lot of times that it's good ideas, but without realization, meaning there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but no one's actually needs to take action. And that's the main problem. And a lot of times there's suggestion, oh, we should do this, we should move from mail list, but who is going to set up all the system to move away from mail list and doing something different?
And you touch on the next topic that you have to guess, which is growth, roles, and reputations.
Is it growth, roles, and reputations? Is that what it is?
Yes!
Hey, you won a prize!
So, because I feel that you begin to touch on this topic of, yes, what if we could build a bridge? Who decides what bridge we're building, right? Because you're right, but you could say to that person, I want you to invest time, energy, and effort. And to guarantee that success of that effort paying off, they need a champion. They may need someone to advocate for them. They may need a shepherd. Will it be you? Right? Can you, as I look at the panelists, think of a time when you shepherded something through that was novel or was different, or you even infrastructure or pieces or code or subsystems where you had to help someone who was like more junior than you grow in a role. Or even you can talk about your own experience, I think, which is how did you go that way? Because glibc has changed, right? We now use reviewed by and we didn't used to. We now use patchwork and we didn't used to. I have had my own ideas changed by Florian over time about what does security mean, right? Like, how do we apply security to our projects? But so let me ask you, broadly, growth, roles, and reputations. If we don't have the bridges and the bridges are missing, where have you built bridges? Have you built bridges? Do we need to build more bridges?
And we have a question from Gwen.
Ah, Gwen.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how did you manage the growth in your career in the projects? You know, from going like a regular developer to suddenly someone who can approve patches and who is on the line if the patch you approved suddenly breaks something, because that is something that I went through being an area maintainer. And are there resources that you use? Are there some stuff that you can share about managing that and being good at reviews and things like that?
Unfortunately, I'm going to give you a bad answer, which is that I didn't manage any of this. It happened to me. I didn't plan out any of this in advance. I didn't plan to become a maintainer or a developer or anything. That's just what happened to me as my career went on. That's probably not the same for everyone, but for me...
Who was the previous Binutils maintainer?
Ian Lance Taylor. And
why did Ian give you the role?
Because he was leaving Cygnus and he didn't want the role to go to someone outside of Cygnus.
But he picked you.
He did. He picked me purely because I was there working on Binutils at the time.
So
and as a mark, he said, will you do it? And I said, yes. So no, that was obviously a mistake, but...
Had Ian worked to build trust with you?
He was a senior programmer and I was a junior programmer, so therefore I trusted him.
Yeah. Kirill, then Sudi.
Yeah, so to keep it on the people question, I have kind of ramped up quite a few engineers of different levels of experience into GC from a professional setting. And I find that whenever they write the patch and they try to contribute, they always ask, okay, so how is that going to go? Who's going to review it? Why? What are they going to look at? And almost always, eventually, once I get used to it, it always boils down to, I need the approval from that particular person who's usually the maintainer. So there's quite a lot of like personal reputation, credibility that goes to like, I want that particular person to approve this because that's when I have confidence in that. And that's great, but it's also it's one of those points of failure, right? What if that person disappears or retires or whatever? Do we have like choke points in the system? And I found in other projects like LLVM, for example, it feels a bit less personal. Like they say, I'll post a discourse thread, I'll post an RFC, I'll post a PR. Maybe someone will review it, but maybe someone won't review it, but will still approve it. It feels like, maybe it's more democratic. Maybe that's better or worse, but also feels less individualized than I find the GNU projects. So maybe a question, what do you think on that?
I actually found the opposite. Sudi has a question right there.
We were discussing how, Nick, you came with your role today, but I guess 2 years ago or a couple of years ago in Calderon, you said that you are looking to move on as well. So the question now is, how are you growing the people after you?
Everyone I meet, I say, do you want to become the Binutils maintainer? And everyone says no. Richard, would you like to... No. To give you a serious answer to your question, what I am actually trying to do is divest knowledge that I have in my head to other maintainers, senior maintainers, or maintainers in the Binutils, trying to get them to take on the knowledge that I have and to take on roles and basically find someone who's then you can take over from what I'm doing. So, and I think this is going to be a long process. It's not going to be just done.
I want to just take points from Jeremy, and maybe Adhemerval. Jeremy.
Can I just stand back a bit? I think we're worrying about growth and progression. The first step of growth is the hardest one. Embecosm tends to recruit out of university because we can't afford to buy good experienced GCC engineers, because if you're good, you've got too expensive. And so actually when people come in, it isn't a question they ask. They want to know how GCC works. And we have a 13-week intensive training course which pulls it all to pieces and teaches them everything they know. What we've then learned is internally mentoring, daily mentoring, where as you work on your first project, there is someone who won't let you say, oh, it's okay. They will drill into what you go. The big barrier they hit, and I think Pietra, who's here, Pietra's actually been with me for 7 years, but even she's got to make that first step from contributing to all our internal repositories to putting her stuff out in the public. And that's the scary bit of I'm terrified of getting it wrong. And LLVM does a good job on this about training people in inclusive language, how to respond to someone who makes a completely rookie error, because we all make mistakes when we cock up. I give a very good example of that. Okay, so we put stuff in, and it's that first step in growth is hard. I think getting up to maintainer, it's absolutely classic. You know, if anyone wants promotion, first question to them in who's going to replace you? Okay, that's a job of people to go. That's not the hard bit. The hard bit is that very first step of making your first patch, getting out there and making an idiot of yourself in public.
Yeah.
We have a question from Alex.
Question from Alex, and then I'd love to hear from Pedro or Adhemerval.
How do we help people who take alternative routes through education, such as people who simply do not have the monetary support to go to university? How do we help them understand that this can be a career pathway? Because I know many, many, many talented programmers who just don't have any connection, and they're, quite frankly, their experience and their talent is being wasted. And they don't even realize that it's possible to take the path that I have. Like, I'm a dropout, and I'm very happy to be working at Baylib now. I'm very happy that they gave me a chance. How do we change the culture of corporations to be more open to that? Maybe this is a little out of scope for this, but I think it's an important question to ask.
Yeah, I think Alex, if I can reframe that question, your question is, Jeremy has made a great example of growth, but it's growth certainly within a company. Yes. And I think that there is a significant growth opportunity, I think, like continuous learning, continuous education. There are certainly always difficulties in those cases, and what you're asking is like, how do you get mentors? How do you get the kind of things that Jeremy's talking about, but outside of that environment?
Not just mentors, but how do they?
Yeah.
So I think what we should do is like maybe share our own stories. Like I got to GCC not because I wanted to do compilers or I learned to do compilers, but I was doing a PhD and doing CFD, and the code produced by the compilers was slow, so I had to fix the compiler, right? And eventually it ended up here. It wasn't planned at all, but it's like open source, and doing open source in public, it gets you career opportunities, and maybe we should share our stories to encourage others to simply try, because there's nothing wrong. The worst thing that can happen is that you contribute 2 patches and then move on to another project.
I think that's a good answer, but just to clarify what I meant is specifically to get employment, because a lot of these people don't realize that it's an option to contribute and from there use that experience to transition.
It was the same for
so
me.
It was a good answer.
I didn't start out in open source or free software or anything like that. I was starting for a commercial company doing commercial programming, and it wasn't working. And there were bugs, and they said, okay, well, look, try this free compiler instead. Maybe this commercial one we bought is rubbish. So try GCC. But you don't have to have the standard career path. I mean, I did, but that it wasn't necessary. If you can show people that there is opportunity in the open source, I'm sure people will follow it.
And I would like to hear from 2 people. I'd like to hear from Adhemerval, and I'd like to hear from Florian, who hasn't spoken, but he's sleepy. And tell me about how you came to work in this area.
So as a kid, I printed out tm.tech. Was it the target manual for GCC, tm.tech info, on continuous form paper, but not the printed, not the rendered version, but the tech info source code with all the. And then I tried to learn C from that. Obviously, that didn't work, but I found this interesting. So my road to being a toolchain developer was a bit indirect. I wanted, as a student, I wanted to rewrite the world in Ada. So that's how I got my GCC commit access, and I did some cleanup patches for Ada support routines in GCC back then. But yeah, I got sort of sucked into this security world. But then eventually the chance came to me to join the Red Hat Platform Tools team, and that's where I ended up. But I had a pretty traditional background. I studied mathematics at university, so that made it easy for me to get hired by the larger companies, I suppose. That is, yeah.
So I used to work at IBM, and I was not working with open source, but doing something which was not, I didn't really like it. And I was trying to get out of that project, and I saw no opportunity to work with Glibc and the GNU Toolchain team. And I took the chance. So I think answer your question is if you see a chance to work with an open source project, if it's a minor contribution, just try, spend some months, see if it fits you, and try to engage with the community. Something that when I'm reviewing patches and trying to help people is let's move your proposition forward, meaning I'm not going to spend just commenting some typos. I'm gonna review your patch, understand what you're trying to do, to give you meaningful comments, so I can give a meaningful interaction with you, so we can see that if you are really willing to do this, or if you're just poking to see if you can get a contribution. Because I think interaction with the community is really understanding, even if it's not your area, if it's not something that you maintain, but trying to give meaningful comments, meaningful review.
Thank you, Adhemerval. And we are switching to the next category, governance and how decisions are made.
Yes. You are all senior developers, and you all make decisions every day, and you all help your projects move forward with the decisions that they're making. How do you make those? How do you feel about making them?
And what are your questions?
What are your questions? Yeah. Do you feel that you want a decision to get made and it's slow or it's stalled? You're on version 25 of your patch and you never know if it'll get accepted because you don't know if someone is willing to accept the architectural change you're proposing or not. And if you really want to turn up the room temperature, ask Florian about Stirl copy, Stirl cat.
I would only say when I wanted to know whether it was going to be accepted or not, I asked, and kept asking until the answer was yes.
Is that a viable thing, panelists? As from an individual personal perspective, is it viable?
Okay, so what exactly was the question? So
is it okay if someone just keeps asking, can I put it in yet? Can I put it in yet? Can I commit it yet? Can I commit it yet? And they keep asking. Is that enough? Or not?
Yeah, I think reminding me that I should review the patch is always a good idea because I forget. So that's kind of a good way to put pressure like on me.
But
so
the
I think it's
caveat is,
viable.
if you've said no, they have to accept that.
Yes. Yeah, I think.
No. I mean, no with reasons.
Yeah, because I think for me, if I'm deciding about the patch, I'm sort of combining if I want the feature or if I want to be able to maintain that feature for next 20 years. And if I think the feature is not useful or the code is not maintainable, then I don't. I would prefer to not be pushed to keep it.
Yeah, Jeremy.
So just from a commercial point of view, my customers always, quite often, they've got a new chip And for credibility, they want their tooling upstream. And the answer has to be, we will do a best effort, but we can make no guarantees. What would be compelling for me is if there was a process and I could say, so long as we follow this process, and it might be things about a chip being in production because we're not having non-production chips in there. It might be having a guaranteed commitment of 3 years maintenance because I could charge for that. That would make my life a lot easier because customers do not like well, we'll do our best. It's very hard to get large sums of money out of them. So I would love a process that says, these are the criteria, and if you meet all of these, and you quote, and then you can go upstream. And if those were written down, it'd be super valuable.
Okay. Nick, may I interrupt for a second? Andrew has a question.
Yes. So I don't remember how many people have had patches up to 25, but what is your guys' view of how many versions is too many of a patch set from a contributor point of view, 25 or even version 6 is starting to get pushing the point.
It depends partially on who is submitting the patch. If it's an experienced developer and I know that they know what they're doing, then I'm willing to iterate if necessary. If it's a new contributor and I'm thinking, okay, we've done 2-3 revisions and it's still not working, at that point, I'm going to think, well, maybe we need to change the approach and maybe break up whatever it is into smaller pieces so that they can be reviewed separately, something like that, something more inclusive. I do try to be as extra friendly and extra encouraging.
Yeah. We have a question from Gwen, Nick. Perfect.
So I have a question somewhat related to the previous can I commit it yet? Can I commit it yet? Which is like, if you propose the change, it doesn't have to be a patch. And the only, let's say only 2 people, 2 maintainers talked about it, and each of them has their own firm opinion on it and they disagree. How would you go about resolving that stalemate if the 2 of them have, their opinions and you need or really want a change to happen, but one says I'm for it, the other says I'm against it, and the discussion died like a month ago, for instance?
And we have Pedro comment on this, and I also want to hear from Florian.
I'm not sure I completely understood the question.
If you've got a stalemate,
Okay.
then how do you move forward?
Oh, okay.
Imagine a patch submission is being reviewed by 2 people.
It depends. Am I the one saying no?
You're the man in the middle. You have to decide.
I'm the one who wrote the patch. I don't know. I'm biased because I know who other people are in the project, but myself, I'll probably explain better. Try to explain better why my approach is the way it is, and try to get other people's opinions. Get a third person to break the tie, maybe.
But what is if it's 2 global maintainers disagree?
Right. and depends on the
Sorry,
area.
to repeat the question, I guess the question is it the role of a global maintainer to intervene in stalemate situations? Or if there are 2 global maintainers, whose role is it to intervene?
Yeah, sometimes it is.
So
I know the answer to this question.
the individual GNU projects have very different conflict resolution procedures, and I can speak mostly for glibc, and for glibc, it's if there's a conflict, then we are basically stuck. There's supposed to be a resolution process, but I tried to use it and it didn't resolve the issues. So and yeah, I think sometimes you can look at what the objections are. Sometimes people have there's a misunderstanding and you can correct that, but sometimes there's fundamental disagreement. And I think what we owe to the contributors is that we send a clear message. So even if there's this conflict and we can't get the contribution accepted, then that should be someone who says, okay, I'm sorry, this didn't work out. And there's a sort of conclusion to that. I mean, currently what tends to happen, we have a patch for glibc right now that adds translation to get option strings. And we are just not responding with a yes or no. And that is not the best approach, obviously. So decision by indecision, basically.
We are going to take final comment on this area from Sudesh, and then we move on to the next area.
I do have a concrete answer.
Okay, yeah.
All right. It does depend on per project, but I would say that if there's a conflict between maintainers, then a global maintainer steps in. If there's conflict between global maintainers, that's where the chief maintainer or the steering committee steps in, and it's their responsibility to make the decision. Fortunately, for me, that hasn't happened yet, but that's the idea of this hierarchy of responsibility.
So I think for strictly development-related questions like patch reviews, we would like it if the GNU maintainers do not step in, right? It is a consensus building exercise. But just to tag on to what Florian was saying, in my experience in the glibc community, there's enough people forthcoming enough that if there is such a conflict situation, somebody steps in and tries to mediate and steer the discussion to some kind of acceptable conclusion. It doesn't have to be 100% acceptable conclusion for one person. It could be a compromise, but we tend to try and build towards that consensus in most cases. It doesn't work all the time, but most cases.
There's a theme, which is we need to have our processes better defined here. Which I think that's as we mature, we can make them better. You're right about consensus building, but we must remember that failing to make a decision is still a decision. So I think having ultimately, when you cannot sort things out, having a way to get to a final arbiter is actually important, so things just don't end up being stuck.
Excellent. And with that, we move on to our last topic, which is infrastructure and tools for developers. What do developers need? What do you need in the audience? Do you need emails? Perhaps. Do you need email that doesn't munge patches? Do you need other things? Do you need a build bot that always is green? Do you need, what do you need? What do the panelists need in your day-to-day work? Do you, questions, I mean, I can ask, Richie, I'd love to know, how big is the machine under your desk when you're working at home?
At home?
Yes,
So it's actually very comparable at office and at home. So the machine under my desk is just 12-core Ryzen. At home, it's 2 generations old. No, 3. At office, it's 1 generation old. Moderately amount of memory, some disk, and enough screen space. Keyboard. I need a mouse because I have to operate a web browser. But other than that, I'm fine with lots of X terms on my screen. So 25 X terms and 1 browser window, and I'm fine with that.
Do we have other questions?
We have a question from James.
I could use the rest of the time on myself to ask this question, but the one I want is, you asked what I need.
Yeah.
I would like the COBOL front end to work on all the machines that GCC supports on the 16 page, with a list of architectures. And I don't have access to those machines. And we've had a lot of difficulty and complication trying to use a C-farm, which I'm not even sure is the right route. So I would like a better way to test our stuff so it would work on the machines you want them to run on.
So that is a great question, which is, do the primary architectures we support across all of the projects, do we need hardware for all of them? And in a way that makes it accessible to individuals? Is that a goal that the projects should have as part of their ability to interface with new developers or developers for whom you may block contributions by saying, that target, that device doesn't work. Nick.
Something vaguely similar. It's big triggered from by the way I broke Binutils' trunk right before coming here. The tribots are wonderful, and they have been ever so beneficial. But when they go wrong, it can sometimes be very hard to figure out why, because there's not much visibility into them. It might be nice to have QEMU images or something you can download to replicate the configuration of a tribot, so you can run it yourself really slowly in emulation in QEMU to try to get to the same failure point.
Adhemerval.
So some time ago, there was some discussion on how to bootstrap glibc on different architectures, some years ago, in fact. And because we didn't have any way to correctly build glibc for that architectures, and Joseph Meyer came up with a script where you can bootstrap a new toolchain, and it helps a lot new developers because we can point out to that script and they can create a new toolchain to use it. And another good experience I have is working with the Debian developers. They gave me access to a lot of different kind of machines, MIPS machines, EA64, Alpha. So one suggestion is trying to contact other communities to see how they can improve our work. And it was really helpful.
I'm going to ask you two related questions, but do you feel that that touches on Jeremy's point that glibc both documented and formalized a bootstrap process by which anyone coming to us would say, hey, this isn't building. And we'd say, did you use build many glibcs? It does all the steps in sequence for you and the steps correctly, and therefore it became a reference point? Is that your...
Yes.
Okay. The second point I was going to say is, should you, or the panelists that are here, should the projects have closer interactions with the distributions, right? Because the distributions are building packages, have the hardware available for the packages they're building and the binaries they have. And I know some of you here work for distributions. I work for a distribution. Richard, you work for distribution. Florian, you work for distribution. Should there be closer ties? Because they have machines, they have some access, right? Should they? Can I get access to SUSE
Can't we
hardware?
rely on the distributions to interface with us, to say, look, we've been testing this out and actually it doesn't work. Here's a bug report.
Sure. Absolutely. I don't have any answers. I'm just asking you. So you say you want the distributions to involve more.
That's my easy answer.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Mark.
Yes, question from Mark.
No, just for Nick, at least, doesn't really help. But for x86, for the Binutils tribots, there are containers which you can just replicate exactly. But of course, that's often only on common hardware.
Yeah. Sorry, Richard.
So like for GCC, I'm interacting with myself all the time. And so I think for the distributions, at least for Red Hat and SUSE, we have like at least one developer on each of the projects. So basically, we don't have the issue of a lack of contact. I know.
But
like,
what about these people? These people are not you and don't interact with them. Well, they might interact with themselves on a regular basis, but can they interact with you if they wanted access to hardware that SUSE had?
Oh, in that way, no, of course not. I mean, so when I get the question on the upstream GCC side, where can I test patches, then I defer them to the compile farm, because that's a really useful thing we have, and there are a lot of machines on there. I would prefer
Does SUSE provide machines to the compile farm?
No, because we don't build hardware.
Okay. Kirill?
I think Major is missing S390.
Yeah, so yeah.
Kirill, then Florian.
Yeah, so one kind of class of tools that I'm interested in is, we were in SVN moved to Git because we said, well, people these days use Git. Now we're discussing, well, we should be using a GitHub or Forge things, something that's not email, because that's what the new people are familiar with. And I think the next wave is basically AI tools, right, for coding and reviewing, because people vibe code stuff. So, there's a question. I'm not saying we should be doing this, but the question is, what should be our position is?
Did you go to Pietro's BOF?
I did, but I mean, that touched a whole bunch of other stuff. But for example, I talked yesterday about guidelines for reviewers, for example. And it strikes me that in my downstream work, I've noticed that a lot of these guidelines are things that we have put in a YAML file in the top level directory of a project, and then AI tools would just automatically use them and actually improve the review that give you quite a lot. So anyway, I'm not saying we should use AI tools necessarily, although it would be cool if we did, but how can we make the project easier to interact with AI tools for those who do?
Yeah, David has his hand up for a question. Yeah. And then Andreas, then you. Okay.
Well, two things. I mean, one is to re-emphasize the compile farm availability for people to be able to test patches for S390, which for various reasons of my previous employer doesn't want to include a system there. There is the Marist Linux 1 systems, which do allow access equivalent to what's available to the compile farm, and people should utilize that. But my question for everybody in the audience is that the compile farm currently supports CPU systems. I was curious if people are interested in GPU systems at the compile farm, given the increasing usage and support of those for offloads, debugging, and other purposes.
Florian, I'd like to get your thoughts on, again, distribution involvement with the projects, availability of hardware, and you can layer on David's question of GPUs.
So I think as a Fedora office, by the way, Fedora offers machine access to contributors, so that's a bit different for us. And there's also an S390 machine. But I think there are a couple of issues there. It becomes increasingly difficult to get stuff into data centers that is not like hyperscale-like stuff. So if you've got a MIPS system, that's not going to be a hyperscale system. It might not even have console access. And putting that into a data center, it gets increasingly difficult for us. That being said, it is certainly something we could allocate resources for, because that is definitely something we can fix with money. On the other hand, there are, for most targets where hardware is still in production, there must be someone who benefits from GCC support, from glibc support, and ideally they would take care of putting stuff into the compile farm and making stuff available remotely. That is, for many targets, that happens today, but there are exceptions, and we are still supposed to maintain them somehow, and that's getting increasingly difficult if we want to make tree-wide cleanups that impact all architectures at the same time.
Yeah, and those are very hard to do without claiming that you've done the due diligence for the architects.
Yeah, I mean, with many glibcs, we can at least say, okay, it's the builds, but that doesn't really tell us. But on the other hand, if we break the thing in a horrible way and nothing works anymore, and someone comes after 5 years, then we can say, okay, obviously you're the only user, so we should remove this now. But going back to the GPU question, my impression is that we are just starting to maintain the GPU stacks within distributions. And before that, it was completely separate. And if you don't interact with the community for your GPU stuff, then the community doesn't really need hardware support. But I don't think it's a viable model going forward to keep things separate, because the maintenance costs are just going to increase, and we might get more divergence in the GPU space or accelerator space in general, and then things go downhill from there. And so, yeah, I think in the future we would need access to these systems as well. On the positive side, I expect them to be more data center friendly than some of the embedded stuff we would like to test. So, but on the other hand, these systems tend to be extremely expensive, so access is restricted usually.
So we are going to take 2 final questions from Alex and from Seger, and after that we will have each panelist give a short summary of what was the most interesting takeaway from this discussion for you. So start thinking about your answers to the summary. Alex.
I kind of got the idea from hearing someone else answer another question. Maybe an anonymous portal to ask the questions you're too afraid to ask would be helpful for both beginners and the experienced programmers in the community. Just not sure how to phrase that as a proper question, mind you. So,
hi, I'm Seger, and I'm one of the maintainers of the C farm. It's called C farm. It's not called compile farm. It used to be called GCC compile farm even, but nowadays it's called C farm. It has no anything with GCC or with the FSF. It actually is its own tax exempt legal whatever something in France actually. Wow. Okay, so anyone here can really easily get an account on the C farm. You need to send a request, right, on the C farm website, portal.cfarm.net, and you just send in an email and some text that sort of proves that you did something open source, right? So maybe, well, for GCC, just your name is enough. You just look at the maintainers file, right? But we need a working email address, and it needs to be the same bloody email address. So for that reason, any contributions on GitHub do not work because GitHub mangles email addresses. So, yeah, that's really annoying. Sometimes we can find it on a project's mailing list or whatever archive. That it is okay, but very often, yeah, GitHub is not good. But it is really, really, really easy for anyone here to get an account on the C farm. And we have very many machines, very many big machines, and very strange architectures as well. And I'm not calling PowerPC strange, by the way.
Yeah, excellent. All right, panelists, we are at the end of time and we have dinner, but what was the most interesting question? What did you have as a takeaway? What did you learn? Do we think that Richie's statement of like, maybe we should do bios of some of the developers and just post them because then people will know that you might have come from a non-traditional background when you onboarded Growth and Roll. Maybe we take anonymous questions and then publish answers for them. But Hansa.
Okay, yeah, so I always have to speak first. So it's
You're at the end and you got the mic.
Okay,
We'll cut across.
I was mostly curious about the onboarding section because I wanted to hear what people perceive as a problem these days to work on the projects. And yeah, I sort of agree that it might be a good idea to somehow present that being open source developer is actually good life. You know, you get dinners and conferences. So, yeah.
I think I pick up two things. I think the process thing is something we need to get better at, formalizing our processes. But I think the important thing for me was the onboarding and specifically that first commit. Mm-hmm. And I think there's all sorts of ideas here. Actually, on the last question we asked, office hours. I'm not so worried about the anonymity, but knowing that some of the senior people here are available half an hour a week when you can just join a call with them, I think makes a huge difference to getting people over that first hurdle of their first commit.
For me, I think it was the reminder that even though we tend to work quite closely together these days, each project has very different contribution structure and governance structure, and some things don't really translate to across the GNU Toolchain.
Yeah, so for me, the most interesting bit of information was that this kind of thing called GitHub exists, and that there are actually very many ways of processes projects use. So there isn't a GitHub process, but there are many, and the confusion is out there as well.
For me, it's not really from this talk, but actually from lots of talks in this cauldron. The takeaway I've got is that I need to improve the documentation in the Binutils wiki about how to be a contributor, how to start, and how to review patches as well. That needs to be much more information there. So that's what I'm going to be doing when I get home.
So for me, it's we didn't have a straight answer, but at least it generates some discussion. Is how to proceed when we have a stalemate, meaning, do we need a global maintainer that has the final answer, or can we find with a community itself? And I don't have this answer, and it would be good to have someone with better ideas to how we resolve this kind of conflicts where different maintainers have different opinions, and we need at least to give the answer for the patch submitter how to proceed, or if he's going to say no or not.
And yeah, for me, it's been the verbalization or realization that we have a lot of processes that maintainers know exist, but the community isn't aware of them, and we take them for granted because we've been involved for so long. And the reminder of how I was so happy the first time I contributed a patch to the community, the Binutils, GDB. I remember being in awe, seeing Nick Clifton, being involved, and I was like, who's this person? And how other people who are newcomers also will have the same feeling. And I also have that feeling when I contribute to other projects, random projects. It's like, oh, my patch was accepted. That's so great. So that also happens with our community, and we are so used to not thinking about that. And I really think that I like the idea of the bio, and
Carlos, can I put that question on you too?
Yes.
What are your takes?
Carlos.
What?
I was about to ask, what's your summary? What is your takeaway?
I love documenting process, describing how we should do things, specifically because it builds structure. And I'm going to use an example of someone here in this room. So I'm looking to Andreas Hutel. So I spent a lot of time documenting a glibc release process that we run through every 6 months. Andreas picked it up and made it much better. But he started from a position where we already had accepted documentation, accepted process, accepted consensus. Nod your head if it made it better to have that document in place. Yeah. If we didn't have it, it would have made it much more difficult to approach and say, I want to help in this way, but I'm starting from a position where I have documentation. So for me, it still is like documenting how we get to decisions, consensus, or appropriate process is always really important, especially for new contributors, because then they can go and read that and say, this project definitely is thinking about how they're going to onboard, how they're going to grow, what roles they're going to have, and having that process. Even if it's per project, as Florian says, the projects each are going to be different, but if each project had their own document today, that'd be, I think, a fantastic growth for the projects.
For me, it is the biggest surprise that this was much less controversial discussion than I expected. So it's great to see. It's great to see that we as GNU Toolchain community are much more on the same page about our processes and barriers than we may have thought. This is my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you.